Hoyoung, seeing the relentless struggle all around him, grits his teeth. Even though they'll respawn after dying, it doesn't make watching Seoyun's ruthless killing spree any easier. Sun Seoyun, smiling like she's having the time of her life, watches them all with cold amusement, fully enjoying the chaos she's created. Our boy, fueled by pure rage, charged toward the altar like a madman, slicing through his enemies like vegetables. His eyes locked onto Sun Seoyun, and without a second thought, he dashed straight for her, their weapons clashing with a force that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. On the other side, Kim Seong, being his usual over-the-top self, is standing there yelling at some poor guy in front of him, making sure everyone knows just how much trouble they're in. The men, understandably confused by Seong's wild laughter, don't quite get the severity of the situation. You'd think the whole laughing like a maniac thing would tip them off, but hey, we can't all be geniuses. With his eyes gleaming with determination, Seong readies his trusty level 2 fist stone and declares, because of course he's got to announce everything, that now that his big bro Lee Hoyoung has reached the altar, they don't need to hold back anymore. And with that, he charges at the enemy like a bulldozer, tossing men aside like they're lightweight action figures. Seriously, those guys didn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, Hoyoung finds himself face to face with Sun Seoyun, and boy, is it tense. His sword is pointing right at her, while she's got her gun aimed straight back at him. They're having this silent face-off, with Seoyun wondering how Hoyoung can be so strong at a measly level 2. And Hoyoung? He's casually smirking, just as curious about how she climbed her way to level 13. Neither one seems to have an answer, but before Seoyun can puzzle over it too much, a bright blue light flashes under Hoyoung's feet. A status window pops up, announcing that Hoyoung's officially claimed the altar. But there's a catch. He needs 2 more people to lock it down for good. Looks like the showdown with Seoyun is the first step. Not one to wait around. Hoyoung lunges forward, sword slashing through the air. But Seoyun blocks him with her gun, firing off bullets from every angle. And here's where Hoyoung shows off. He doesn't just dodge the shots, he deflects them, making it look easy. Seoyun's probably wondering if he's part ninja or something because those reflexes. Now, if you think Hoyoung's skills came out of nowhere, you'd be wrong. His buddy, Seo Juno, is not just a swordsman of legendary skill in their region. He's also a master at table tennis. Yep, ping-pong, believe it or not. In pro matches, it's not enough to just see the ball and swing. You've got to predict your opponent's moves based on the smallest of tells, like body language or where their eyes are looking. Seo Juno earned the nickname, the Genius of Prediction, and it's this exact skill that helped him dodge magic bullets like it's nothing. Hoyoung must have picked up a trick or two because he's pressing Seoyun hard, dodging everything she throws at him. As the rest of the team mops up the remaining players from the other region, An Secheng declares they've finished things here, and, as expected, Kim Seong pipes up saying they need to hurry before the enemies respawn. Always the hype man, that one. Seoyun, with a cut on her cheek, wipes away the blood and throws a snide question Hoyoung's way, asking if the return crystal revives them after death. Hoyoung confirms, but not without adding a little flex, saying it's useless for her to know now. Even if she has some hidden ace up her sleeve, Hoyoung believes he's tough enough to handle it. Ready to finish things, he braces himself. But, surprise, Seoyun's not done. She throws a verbal curveball, asking if Hoyoung really thinks he's already won. That's when he notices something alarming. Her gold is draining fast, and her level 3 firing skill just upgraded to level 4. And now it's Hoyoung's turn to curse under his breath. He readies for the attack, but she's faster than expected. The bullets hit him and his vision goes fuzzy. Just before he goes down, he hears his team shouting his name, rushing towards him. A final status window flashes, announcing that the 3rd floor mission is over. Back at the lobby, everyone's catching their breath, but Kim Seong doesn't seem to be in a celebratory mood. Hoyoung, noticing his buddy sulking, asks what's wrong. Seong, ever the drama king, grumbles about how he did most of the work but got a lousy reward for it. Hoyoung chuckles, thinking back to the fight. He hadn't expected the last-minute flurry of bullets, but somehow he managed to land a strike on Seoyun at the same time. He also can't shake Seoyun's final words. She promised to remember his name, and honestly, that's the kind of thing that sticks with you. Despite the victory, just the thought of crossing paths with her again gives him the creeps. But there's no time for a breather. Suddenly, a loud shout catches everyone's attention. They turn to a large window which now displays the defeated group from earlier. The status window warns that the group will soon face a disaster. And sure enough, a monstrous roar echoes through the space. The window explains that players who didn't manage to secure a single kill are now in deep trouble. One of the players from the defeated group cries out for help. Chai Yizil, always the healer at heart, tries to break through the window to assist, but she quickly pulls back when the monster lets out a terrifying growl. They all stand there, watching helplessly as the disaster plays out in front of them. When the chaos finally subsides, the status window confirms that only one player from the C-1427 area survived. Hoyoung immediately realizes that the lone survivor must have snagged at least one kill. As they survey the scene, fresh footprints reveal who it is. None other than Sun Seoyeon. Because of course it's her. The status window announces that a new group has formed, and as Seoyeon makes her dramatic entrance, the first thing out of her mouth is a sneering comment about how filthy everything is. Hoyoung grits his teeth, muttering under his breath. Yep, that uneasy feeling from earlier? Totally justified. In the midst of a city reduced to rubble, the group faces a harsh new reality. As they survey the destruction, a woman asks if the fourth floor really resembles an abandoned city. Before anyone can respond, the status window flickers to life, delivering an ominous message. In 6 hours, disaster will strike this cursed place. They are tasked with defeating all the monsters in the city and securing an escape portal. The kicker? Only 20 portals will appear, and they have to make sure no one else uses theirs. Not exactly a friendly scavenger hunt. As the countdown begins, one guy is practically buzzing with excitement. Finally, it's a monster hunting mission. After the grueling challenges of the second and third floors, he's thrilled at the idea of facing off against some real monsters. Meanwhile, Lee Byung-kyeol, ever the voice of reason, points out that with 20 portals and only 13 of them, there's no need for them to fight among themselves. Kim Seyoung, hyped up as usual, swears he's going to slay all the monsters and level up like crazy. But Chai Yizil, ever cautious, raises a good point. If they can't let others use their portals, there must be a limit to how many monsters they'll face. Seo Juno agrees, noting that if one person opens multiple portals, others might be left without an escape. He suggests that the extra portals could be a trap laid by the tower itself. On Sechang, always the strategist, concludes that no matter how many monsters they face, they should focus on escaping the moment a portal opens. Seo Juno insists everyone agree to stop hunting and leave immediately when a portal appears. A woman nods in agreement, and it seems like the plan is set. Chai Yizil, however, notices Kim Seyoung's odd expression and asks him about it. Naturally, he snaps back, claiming it's just his face. Typical Seyoung. Lee Hoyoung watches them with a smile, feeling like their group has finally become a cohesive team. But despite the camaraderie, he can't shake the nagging concern about what's still to come. He looks back, and then there's Sun Seoyeon. She's already walking away, not too interested in following orders. With a dismissive tone, she asks why she should listen to them and even threatens to kill anyone who gets in her way. Naturally, Kim Seyoung, Seo Juno, Chai Yizil, and Lee Hoyoung exchange looks, all wondering the same thing. Should they just gang up on her? Flashback to 12 hours earlier. Tensions were high as Kim Seyoung, feeling cornered, spat out some pretty harsh words at Sun Seoyeon, claiming that without her gun, she'd be nothing but useless trash. Well, Seoyeon wasn't having it. In a fury, she kicked him and slammed his face into the dirt, reminding him in no uncertain terms that he's the real trash if he thinks he has multiple lives to burn through. Lee Hoyoung, watching from the sidelines, stepped in, telling Seoyeon to cut it out. He wasn't about to let her pull this in their territory. Inwardly, he reflected on his long journey to eliminate Kim Junsong, a would-be star killer. But now he's standing face-to-face with a real one, Seoyeon. And worse, she's no slouch with that gun of hers. Sun Seoyeon stepped up to Hoyoung, acknowledging their not-so-pleasant reunion. Hoyoung, sensing the gravity of the moment, cut the small talk and asked her if she had something to say. A strange feeling washed over him, like a hunter realizing he's suddenly become the hunted. He took a step back just as a status window appeared, announcing that Seoyeon had marked him as her main target. Her gaze sharpened, confirming the designation. Hoyoung, confused, quickly checked the guide, his eyes widening at the implications. Back to the present, and Sun Seoyeon is already gone, leaving a thick tension in the air. Kim Seyoung, though, has his hands full with a massive orc. Of course, in true Seyoung fashion, he apologizes to the beast, half joking that it's too handsome to hit, but hey, it'll make for good experience points. As the orc falls, something unexpected happens. A portal opens, Seong, clearly startled, turns around only to find Lee Hoyoung right behind him. Hoyoung, cool as ever, asks why Seong looks so shocked, almost like he got caught doing something he shouldn't. Seong, trying and failing to mask his anxiety, nervously laughs, saying he thought Hoyoung would have opened the portal already. But Hoyoung isn't buying it. He gives Seong a solid kick into the portal, telling him to stop messing around. With that dealt with, Hoyoung reflects on the guide's ominous warning about star killers. It said their traits would fully manifest on the Day of Blood, and if he's killed by a star killer on that day, they'll reap a huge reward. Hoyoung knows he needs to level up as much as possible before then. He's not sure when the Day of Blood will arrive, but he's got a bad feeling it's going to favor the star killer, probably with plenty of casualties. As he walks on, Hoyoung encounters a level 10 orc. This one's not exactly friendly, but Hoyoung dispatches it with ease, gaining more experience. But interestingly, no portal opens this time. He ponders whether, given enough time, he could just wipe out all the monsters on this floor. After all, not everyone has escaped yet, and Sun Seoyin is still out there, probably slaying monsters like it's a hobby. A sudden foul stench hits him like a truck. Pinching his nose, he wonders what's causing the rotting smell. The guide window informs him that while all orcs stink, the ones that leave portals behind are especially pungent. Hoyoung turns around to see another orc, confirming the source of the odor. Wasting no time, he charges forward and slays the beast with a single swing of his sword. The status window flashes again, confirming that a new portal has appeared. Hoyoung smiles. Finally, all that effort is paying off. Sun Seoyin, clearly irritated, stands there. As our boy put on a whole performance, loudly lamenting his terrible luck and acting as if the universe had personally cursed him to never find a portal. Sun Seoyin, clearly on the edge of snapping, asked if he was always this unlucky. With a heavy sigh, Hoyoung replied that random luck missions were his worst enemy, claiming he had never won anything in his life. But internally, he was chuckling. His bad luck was more of a strategy, as he purposely avoided orcs that might open portals. Since Seoyin needed to kill him on the Day of Blood, she reluctantly let him continue his hunt, unaware that Hoyoung had already found his escape. He killed orcs without portals, knowing that dying here without securing one wouldn't do Seoyin any good either. A grin crept onto his face as the status window popped up, announcing that a player had opened a portal, leaving just 5 portals left. Hoyoung glanced at the window, feeling a little relieved that others were making their escapes without any major trouble. Still in character, he slapped his forehead dramatically and grumbled about the awful odds of these random missions while making a fuss over the dwindling portals. Seoyin, now visibly irritated, snapped at him to stop whining and focus on the hunt. As Hoyoung continued slicing through orcs, he couldn't help but notice how much they reminded him of Kim Se-young. Every time he cut one down, he felt a weird combination of regret and satisfaction, almost like his complicated relationship with Seoyin herself. He stole a glance at her, amused that she was worried about him, just so she could be the one to kill him later. Teasingly, he asked why she seemed so nervous when he was the one without a portal. Seoyin snapped back, claiming she wasn't nervous at all. He pressed further, casually asking how many portals she'd already opened. After a brief hesitation, she admitted to 5, a number that startled him. It was a lot, but still manageable. With her having opened 5 and him only 1, he calculated that if everyone else opened one, there would still be 3 portals left. A status window confirmed this, leaving Hoyoung to wonder if he and Seoyin might be the last ones standing on this floor. With only 10 minutes left on the clock, Hoyoung figured it was time to make his exit. He suggested to Seoyin that they split up so he could search for a portal on his own. But before he could leave, she told him to stop. His heart skipped a beat, thinking she had figured out his plan. When he cautiously asked if she had something else to discuss, she mumbled something so quietly he almost didn't catch it. Alarm bells rang in his head, and he quickly made a move to leave, but she grabbed his sleeve, looking embarrassed. She finally admitted that she'd forgotten where she had opened her portals. Hoyoung blinked in disbelief, thinking to himself, really? Directionally challenged now? Fast forward to the lobby, and the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. Kim Se-young, as energetic as ever, raced over to Hoyoung, calling him Big Brother with all the enthusiasm of a puppy. However, the warm reunion didn't go as planned. Hoyoung's fist connected with Se-young's face, sending him crashing to the ground. Apparently, Hoyoung wasn't quite done with the mission in his head. Sun Seoyin, standing beside him, quipped that Se-young looked like an orc now, Hoyoung shot her a look, silently telling her to keep that observation to herself. Chai Yizil stepped forward, visibly relieved that Seoyin had returned in one piece. Seo Juno expressed his relief, although his attempt at a friendly handshake was met with cold indifference as Seoyin turned her back on him, grumbling that he was too loud. Seoyin, nursing his bruised face, muttered under his breath, calling Seoyin little wench and complaining that they should have left her on the 4th floor. Seoyin fired back, calling Seoyin a pig and ordering him to shut up. Seoyin, flexing his muscles, proudly corrected her. Their muscles, not fat. As Hoyoung watched their petty bickering, he wondered if he should have left Seoyin behind after all. But then again, someone marked by the killer star wasn't going to die that easily. He figured he'd let her stick around for now and maybe get some sort of favor in return. But he was still keeping a close eye on her, especially with the looming day of blood ahead. Their momentary peace was shattered when a voice rang out across the lobby. The group turned to see an unexpected visitor. Kum, standing tall and smug. Without missing a beat, Sun Seoyin fired a magic bullet straight at its face, shouting, "Why are you back here again?" Hoyoung watched in disbelief as Kum shrugged off the attack and retaliated by tossing Seoyin against the wall. She called it a monster rabbit as she struggled to her feet. Hoyoung, surprised by how easily Seoyin had been thrown, began to realize just how deadly Kum truly was, even if its stats suggested it was holding back. With a calm air, Kum instructed itself to stay patient, remarking that its work wasn't done yet. Then, looking at the group, it made an announcement that sent a chill down Hoyoung's spine. The next mission was about to begin. Kum, in its usual flair, made an unexpected proposition before they ascended to the next floor. With a dramatic gesture, the lobby transformed into a grand library, rows upon rows of books stretching endlessly. Its voice echoed, explaining that each of them must choose a book. This book, Kum warned, could either aid them in surviving or potentially bring about their downfall. It emphasized the gravity of their decision, telling them that their fate was in their hands. Kim Seoyin, ever the stubborn one, scoffed at the idea, outright refusing to let some stupid book decide his future. Meanwhile, Seo Juno, ever strategic, mused aloud whether he could find a manual on swordsmanship to boost his power. Kum, in its whimsical tone, reminded everyone that the contents of the books must be kept secret. Once their mission on the 5th floor began, the books would vanish. To demonstrate, Kum picked up a book titled The Way for a Cute Rabbit to Survive, showing it off as an example. With that, Kum disappeared, leaving the group in confusion. As everyone scurried to find their chosen book, Lee Hoyoung observed that most people were gravitating towards books aligned with their respective classes. Martial arts, swordsmanship, magic. He approached the guide window, which oddly directed him to a novel titled SSS Rank Returner's Monopoly of Connections. Lee was taken aback, puzzled as to why the guide would recommend something that sounded like a cheap fantasy novel. He hesitated but ultimately selected it, thinking there must be a reason behind the guide's suggestion. Once the choice was made, the status window confirmed that the book was now locked to him, and its contents could not be disclosed. Lee opened the book, expecting something profound, but what he found was disappointing. A bland, generic fantasy novel. Resigning himself to his fate, he continued reading, growing more frustrated. Around him, others were absorbed in their selections, Seo Juno flipping through Thawing Swordsmanship, Kim Seoyin engrossed in Punch of the Fist King, and Chai Yizil deeply focused on knowledge of the Eastern physician. Lee couldn't help but wonder if he had made the wrong choice. He glanced over at On Secheng, who was busy setting up a tent, and then noticed Sun Seoyin muttering angrily about Kum. As she repeatedly hit a wall, Lee wisely decided to keep his distance. The status window then announced that their task was complete and that they would be moving on to the 5th floor. In a blink, the group found themselves seated at desks in what resembled a classroom. The atmosphere felt strange, and soon, murmurs began to spread. Someone wondered who their fellow classmates were, while another remarked on the eerie sensation that time had stopped here. A woman, glancing at her reflection, commented that they seemed younger. Another woman agreed, sharing the sentiment. Lee Hoyoung, looking down at himself, realized they had indeed been reverted to their younger forms, likely to match the setting of the new mission. On Secheng, now visibly skinnier, groaned about losing his well-earned muscles. Kim Seoyin, ever the joker, taunted him, calling him an anchovy. Lee found it amusing to see Seoyin in his younger, shaved head form. Chai Yizil teased Hoyoung, noting he hadn't changed much. while Lee caught sight of a bespectacled Sun Seoyin, who seemed even more irritable than usual. When he asked if it was her, Seoyin removed her glasses, crushing them in her hands, and snapped, asking why he was staring. Before anyone could process the change fully, Kumkum's voice rang through the classroom speakers, asking if they were enjoying their newfound youth. It described this return to their younger selves as a beautiful gift and explained their new task. They had been transported to a dimension where both humans and monsters existed, and they were now cadets in a school that trained monster hunters. Over the next 4 days, they would face various quests, and failure would result in a death mission execution. The stakes had never been higher. Lee Hoyoung knew how serious a death mission could be, and as someone who had faced one before, he steeled himself. He silently regretted choosing a novel instead of a swordsmanship manual but figured there had to be some purpose behind it. Just as Kumkum finished its explanation, a light swept over the group, implanting the necessary memories for their role in this world. Lee Hoyoung groaned as the memories flooded his mind, causing a painful, throbbing sensation. He now had 2 sets of memories, his own and those implanted for this mission. As the memories settled, he realized they aligned with the content of his chosen book, making him wonder if there was more to it than he initially thought. The status window confirmed the success of the memory implantation. In the now bustling classroom, the teacher passionately discussed mana manipulation, drawing diagrams on the blackboard. Seo Juno, seated next to Lee Hoyoung, leaned over and whispered that the once frozen people in the class had started to move again. Lee, lost in thought, pondered the strange parallels between their current situation and a novel. He recognized that he and his classmates were merely side characters in this world, with the true protagonist sitting in front of him, Oh Yoon-nam, a returner with knowledge of the future. Thanks to Yoonam's foresight, he had formed powerful connections and was on the path to greatness. Lee realized he needed to find a way to navigate this world carefully. As the teacher pointed to a complex symbol on the board, he challenged the class to explain it, offering store points as a reward. Lee Hoyoung knew the answer was beyond most students' reach, but before Oh Yoon-nam could respond, he confidently interrupted. He explained that the symbol represented action and that it was currently being researched by Professor Brown's team at Columbia University. The teacher was visibly impressed, his face lighting up as he praised Lee. The status window confirmed that Lee had earned store points, and he couldn't help but smile. At that moment, he realized the true value of his novel selection. It wasn't about martial prowess but about connections. And with that, Lee Hoyoung resolved to outshine Oh Yoon-nam, claiming all the valuable connections for himself. As they strolled through the academy's vast corridors, Kim Seong, ever the chatterbox, couldn't hide his curiosity. He addressed Lee Hoyoung with a playful grin, remarking on how extraordinary it was that Hoyoung had known about the mysterious action earlier. Hoyoung replied calmly, attributing his knowledge to the memories implanted by the tower. Seong, impressed yet envious, quipped that perhaps only Hoyoung had been granted such a good character by the tower. Hoyoung's response carried a faint edge of challenge as he suggested Seong try speaking to the tower if he was so envious. Trailing a few steps behind, Chai Yiziel observed their banter before asking Hoyoung when he thought their next quest would begin. Hoyoung, drawing from the intricate knowledge he had gained from the novel-like memories, responded with certainty. He estimated that the quest should start soon, likely at that very moment. As if to confirm his words, a glowing status window appeared before them, announcing their mission. Clear the dungeon beside Building B37 within 60 minutes. Failure will result in a death mission. The announcement sent a jolt through the group. Hoyoung's expression hardened as he processed the importance of this quest. He realized the item dropped by the dungeon's boss monster held immense significance for the future. Initially, it was destined for Oh Yoon-nam, the protagonist, but Hoyoung refused to let that happen. Determined to rewrite the narrative, he urged the others to move quickly, his voice sharp with urgency, and sprinted toward the dungeon. Upon entering, another status window identified the location as the Orc Den. Oh Yoon-nam, already inside and clearly caught off guard, turned to the newcomers with a bewildered expression, demanding to know how they had managed to find the hidden dungeon. Hoyoung, unfazed and already cutting down an orc with practiced precision, retorted that Yoon-nam couldn't possibly have believed he was the only one capable of discovering it. Yoonam's shock was palpable as he watched Hoyoung and Sun Seoyin fight with incredible skill. He silently questioned how individuals he had dismissed as ordinary could display such power. His unease deepened as he acknowledged that warriors of their caliber should be unforgettable, Yet their presence in this dungeon defied his expectations. Summoning a spear in his hand with an air of authority, he couldn't afford to lose the dungeon reward. With a powerful throw, the spear tore through the air, cutting down multiple orcs in one fluid motion before returning to his grasp as though bound by some mystical force. Kim Seong and Chai Yizil, observing from a safer vantage point, couldn't hide their astonishment. Seong exclaimed about the spear's incredible power, while Yizil marveled at its sheer strength. Hoyoung, however, focused on Yunam's display, acknowledging that the protagonist's prowess was as impressive in reality as it had been in the narrative. Still, Hoyoung's determination remained unshaken. He resolved to claim the dungeon's ultimate reward for himself, no matter how formidable Yunam appeared. With 48 minutes left and 72 orcs remaining, Hoyoung calculated their chances. He knew that Yunam's raw power outclassed his own, but Hoyoung had a keen ability to locate and exploit weaknesses in monsters. He plunged back into the battle, every move precise and deliberate, as he worked to outpace Yunam's kill count. Meanwhile, Sun Seoyin fought with unrelenting focus, her mind replaying the humiliation of their previous mission. The memory of Hoyoung's antics on the 4th floor fueled her resolve to outshine him this time. Her gunfire was relentless, every shot finding its mark as she fought side by side with Hoyoung. Yunam, wielding his spear with calculated efficiency, fully embraced his role as the hero. His movements were a perfect blend of precision and power, reinforcing his position as the story's central figure. Chai Yizil, observing from a distance, was struck by the extraordinary skill on display. She remarked to Seo Juno about how desperate Hoyoung seemed, his every action brimming with purpose. Juno, with tears glistening in his eyes, attributed Hoyoung's determination to his noble heart. He spoke passionately about Hoyoung's unwillingness to let them face a death mission, despite everything they had done to him in the past. Moved by this sentiment, Juno raised his sword and rallied the others, proclaiming that they must fight harder in Hoyoung's honor. His emotional declaration inspired a wave of fervor among the group. Hoyoung, caught off guard by the sudden outpouring of support, could only continue fighting, his expression a mix of confusion and determination. After an intense battle, the status window finally announced the defeat of all orcs and the opening of the boss room. However, the message that followed declared Yunam as the one with the right to challenge the boss monster. Hoyoung felt a surge of frustration as he realized his best efforts had fallen short. A bitter curse escaped his lips as he wrestled with the possibility of giving up. Refusing to back down, Hoyoung stepped forward and addressed Yunam with a resolute tone, requesting the opportunity to challenge the boss. Yunam, perplexed, questioned Hoyoung's sudden request. Hoyoung, his expression turning mysterious, claimed to understand how to break the cycle of regression. This statement shocked Yunam. Hoyoung, with a smirk, stood his ground, not willing to give up the reward. The door creaked open, and the status window flickered to life, announcing Lee Hoyoung's entrance into the boss room. His steps were steady, but his mind replayed the charged moments from earlier. Yunam had stood before him, spear drawn and unwavering. He had wanted to know who Hoyoung truly was, his voice brimming with suspicion. Hoyoung, calm and deliberate, had urged Yunam to lower his weapon. However, Yunam had refused, pressing harder for answers. The spear's edge grazed Hoyoung's neck, drawing a thin line of blood that trickled down his skin. Hoyoung, unflinching, had questioned the urgency of Yunam's curiosity. Instead, he had cryptically asked whether Yunam wasn't more interested in the winter awaiting him at age 32. The mention of that age had sent a jolt through Yunam, his anger flaring. In a grand, rain-battered building, a man had once reflected on the origins of Yunam's curse. He had spoken with a blend of admiration and envy, remarking on the endless regressions that began when Yunam was 17 and stretched to his 32nd year. Yunam, cradling a glass of wine, had nodded solemnly as the man recounted the anguish of living through the same stretch of time repeatedly. He had leaned against the rain-speckled window, his frustration evident as he cursed the unyielding loop of regression. In the present, Hoyoung had pushed Yunam's spear aside with deliberate precision. He had proposed a deal. If Yunam allowed him to face the boss monster, he would reveal a way to escape the cursed cycle of regression. For Yunam, who had endured centuries of torment, the offer was too tempting to ignore. Though his mistrust lingered, he backed away, warning Hoyoung that betrayal would have dire consequences. A status window appearing to declare that Yunam had granted Hoyoung permission to challenge the boss room. Inside, Hoyoung faced the boss monster, a hulking orc warrior exuding menace. The creature's guttural growls reverberated through the room, sending a shiver down Hoyoung's spine. Sweat dotted his brow, but he steadied himself, reminding himself that this was just a novel. Even without precise stats or a detailed guide, he relied on his knowledge of the strategies to defeat it. The orc emitted a swirling smoke and unleashed a deafening roar, an intimidation tactic designed to crush the challenger's spirit. Hoyoung, protected by his heightened senses that shielded him from mental attacks, remained unfazed. Determined, he charged forward, executing his first strategy. He focused on the monster's vulnerable lower body, knowing its upper body was as hard as steel. Striking at its legs with sharp precision, he dodged the orc's retaliatory swings. Exploiting the opening, he unleashed a flurry of strikes to its knees, finally bringing the beast down. With the orc collapsed and vulnerable, Hoyoung didn't hesitate. He delivered the finishing strike, declaring triumphantly that the reward was his. The status window confirmed the victory, announcing the orc warrior's defeat and the item drop that followed. Later, the room echoed with playful shouts as Kim Seong and Hoyoung engaged in yet another round of rock-paper-scissors. Seong's loud groans of frustration filled the air as he lamented his latest loss. Hoyoung, ever composed, basked in his 11th consecutive win. Seong accused Hoyoung of cheating, his tone half serious, but Hoyoung dismissed the claim with a smug grin. He insisted there was no way to cheat in such a straightforward game and demanded his reward. Begrudgingly, Seong muttered curses under his breath as he handed over the gold. From the sidelines, Seo Juno couldn't help but marvel at Hoyoung's uncanny skill, even in something as trivial as a children's game. Hoyoung, sipping from his cup, caught a gleam from the ring on his middle finger. His thoughts wandered to the two mythical items mentioned in the novel. The first, Gungnir, was Unum's legendary weapon, famed for its flawless accuracy. The second was the Ring of Nick, a relic that bestowed unparalleled luck upon its wearer, a boon Hoyoung now possessed. He examined the ring with satisfaction, recognizing its immense potential as a safeguard for the trials ahead. Though he knew Yunam would face many of those trials without such an advantage, Hoyoung resolved to provide him with the vital information needed to fulfill his greatest desire. His musings were interrupted by a loud thud as Sun Seoyeon slammed her cup onto the table. She locked eyes with Hoyoung, challenging him to a game. For her, rock, paper, scissors wasn't just luck but a test of agility, her confidence bolstered by her near 50 agility stat. Hoyoung raised an eyebrow, feigning indifference, and asked how much she was willing to bet. Without hesitation, Seoyeon offered 3,000 gold. Kim Seong, standing nearby, gawked at the sum in disbelief. Hoyoung, after a moment's thought, smirked and proposed raising the stakes to 5,000 gold. The following day, the group gathered at the training area, where Hoyoung took in the scene with an amused grin. It was a classic moment straight out of a novel, the evaluation of strength, centered on the ultimate test of power, striking a punch machine. Oh, and by the way, Sun Seoyeon lost the game previously, losing 5,000 gold. The professor addressed the cadets in the training hall. Before them stood a massive blue crystal. The professor explained the task. They would strike the crystal with their weapons, and the resulting numerical score would measure their magic power. These scores would determine the dungeon practical groups in 2 days, a crucial test that could shape their futures. Seo Juno, his eyes gleaming with curiosity, turned to Lee Hoyoung, commenting on how excited he was to see the true strength of their peers. The first cadet stepped forward, his face a mixture of determination and anxiety. Gripping his weapon tightly, he swung with all his might. The crystal responded with a brilliant flare, displaying a score of 43. Murmurs rippled through the room as cadets commented on the impressive strength of his first attempt. Seo Juno observed the reactions around him and deduced that 43 was considered a high score. Hoyoung, drawing on the memories implanted within him, recalled that this cadet was indeed known for his strength. When Seo Juno's name was called, he approached confidently. With a focused strike, he hit the crystal, and the glowing numbers settled at 69. Gasps of astonishment echoed through the hall as whispers of his strength spread. Juno, with a modest smile, noted that his power might indeed be formidable. Kim Seong couldn't resist the spotlight. Shoving Juno aside with a cocky grin, he proclaimed himself the king of punch machines. With a loud roar, he slammed his fist into the crystal. The result? 75. Flexing his biceps, he taunted the cadets to train harder and eat well. Someone exclaimed in disbelief at his ability to achieve such a high score without using a weapon. The hall fell silent when Sun Seoyeon stepped forward. Her cold, focused expression was unwavering as she fired a magic bullet at the crystal, the shot grazing Seoung's face. And the score froze at 98. The room erupted in shock, cadets questioning how such a feat was possible and marveling at her ability to infuse mana into a gun. Hoyoung couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, thinking that his tower teammates were leagues ahead of these academy cadets. Then, with a loud noise, Oh Yoon-nam crystal blazed, displaying an astonishing 115. Hoyoung's eyes widened as he recognized the sheer power behind Yoon-nam's attack. A vague memory surfaced in his mind, hinting that Yoon-nam was destined for something extraordinary. Later, in the cafeteria, Kim Seoung devoured his meal with enthusiasm. He teased Hoyoung about his score, wondering why it hadn't been higher. Hoyoung shrugged, replying nonchalantly that there wasn't any reward worth trying for. Chai Yizil chuckled, noting Seoung's peculiar ability to speak coherently despite eating. Seo Juno joined in, remarking that Hoyoung's relaxed attitude was beginning to intrigue him. Hoyoung, lost in thought, reflected on his own score of 64. It wasn't low enough to draw attention, but more importantly, it kept him in Yoon-nam's practical group without being chosen as a leader, exactly what he had aimed for. Their conversation was abruptly cut short when a status window appeared before them. The second quest had begun. The details were clear. They had 1 hour to rescue Oh Yoon-nam from the river garden. Chai Yizil, recalling Yoon-nam's earlier performance, asked if he was the strong cadet they had seen in the dungeon. Seo Juno confirmed it, speculating that Yoon-nam might have fallen into a trap. Despite the proximity of the river garden, the urgency of the mission weighed on them. Hoyoung's expression darkened. His knowledge of the novel painted a grim picture. After one of Yoon-nam's regressions, he had disciplined some troublemakers at the academy. Among them was the son of Park Young-sik, the guild leader of Red Moon. Furious, Park Young-sik had sent elite hunters to brutalize Yoon-nam, leaving him on the brink of death. In the story, Yoon-nam was saved by the Ring of Nick, but this time the responsibility lay with them. At the river garden, Oh Yoon-nam knelt on the ground, his breathing labored. A man behind him sneered, mocking Yoon-nam for daring to stand against their young master. The man adjusted his black glasses, only to be interrupted by a flash of light. A magic bullet from Sun Seoyeon struck him directly. Hoyoung, startled by her sudden action, questioned her motive. Seoyeon's reply was icy. She simply didn't like him. Kim Seoung rushed forward, pointing out that this man seemed to prey on those without powerful backing. Hoyoung, visibly annoyed, drew his sword and ordered the group to advance. The enemies exchanged remarks about the newcomers, speculating on their status as academy cadets. One of them created a defensive shield, questioning the presence of a gun. Another taunted his injured ally for letting the brats land a hit, only to be met with a sharp retort. Hoyoung observed the situation carefully. Though Seoyeon's attack seemed impulsive, its timing was impeccable. It had created the opening they desperately needed. Seizing the chance, Yoon-nam rose to his feet and attacked the injured man, his spear slicing through the air. However, the other two enemies dodged his strikes effortlessly. Yoon-nam, glancing at Hoyoung, expressed his confusion over their persistence, but stressed that there was no time for questions. Hoyoung agreed, suggesting they focus on the battle. Kim Seoung targeted the weakened opponent, unleashing his level 2 stone fist spell. But the man raised a barrier just in time, deflecting the attack. As the battle intensified, the injured man, furious, hurled insults at the group, calling them disrespectful brats. Kim Seoung was flung across the floor by the barrier, his body skidding to a halt with a pained grunt. The man who had attacked him laughed cruelly, his voice dripping with derision. He observed that the cadets, sheltered within the academy's walls, were completely unprepared for the harsh realities of the outside world. The battle resumed with even greater intensity. Amid the fray, Lee Hoyoung took charge, positioning Sun Seoyeon at the rear to cover them while the others focused on the front lines. Seoyeon, however, fired her magic bullets with precision, silently defying the need for instructions. Hoyoung directed the injured cadets to retreat to Chai Yizil for healing before rejoining the fight. As Oh Yoon-nam staggered toward Yizil, her magic quickly mended his wounds, leaving him staring at his healed hand in astonishment. He couldn't hide his amazement at the extent of her abilities. Hoyoung, locked in fierce combat, reminded his teammates that the quest was designed to be completed and urged them to draw on everything they had learned. Inspired by his words, Seo Juno delivered a powerful thaw slash, his blade glowing with frost as it struck one of the men. Kim Seong, channeling his strength, unleashed the first punch of the Fist King, his fist connecting with another enemy. Amid the chaos, On Secheng seemed oddly detached, methodically setting up a tent in the middle of the battlefield. Hoyoung couldn't help but glance at him in confusion, wondering if the stress of the situation had finally taken its toll on him. One of the men sneered at their efforts, dismissing their skills and training as irrelevant. He mocked the idea that they could rely on such trivial methods to win. His mockery turned into a fierce charge, joined by his two accomplices, as they lunged at the cadets with deadly intent. The ground shook violently from a powerful explosion. Hoyoung, struggling to catch his breath, realized the gap between his team's abilities and their opponent's experience. The men's coordination and relentless assaults seemed insurmountable. He strategized quickly, knowing that taking down even one of them might destabilize their formation. Yet every approach felt like facing an impenetrable iron door. Chai Yiziel, maintaining her composure, prepared to assist. The man leading the charge smirked, belittling their persistence and noting that the young cadets might have promising futures as hunters, but it wouldn't matter if they didn't survive the day. His ally, however, warned that their delay was becoming a problem. Frustrated by the drawn-out fight, the first man cursed under his breath and made a reckless move, targeting Yiziel. He declared his intent to start with her, his charge filled with lethal intent. Hoyoung shouted in alarm, urging his team to act. Yunam responded instantly, throwing his spear with precision. The man dodged at the last moment, his fury evident as he cursed Yunam. Meanwhile, the other two men advanced, their focus momentarily scattered. Hoyoung's sharp eyes caught the shift. The once unbreakable formation had cracked, creating a crucial opening. One of the men, realizing this, vowed to eliminate the cadets entirely, his voice trembling with frustration. Hoyoung, sensing the rising tension in his enemies, capitalized on their impatience. He remarked on how the chairman of the Red Moon Guild, Park Yangsik, was known for his infamous temper and likely already seething at their failure to complete their task. The men froze, visibly unsettled by the mention of their chairman. Their confidence wavered, their fear of Park Yangsik's wrath taking hold. Hoyoung and his team seized the opportunity. Yunam launched himself at one of the men, his spear striking with precision. Sun Seoyan fired a series of magic bullets, each one hitting its mark with unerring accuracy. Hoyoung joined the attack, his sword cutting through their defenses with calculated strikes. As the two remaining men glanced down at their fallen comrades sprawled on the ground, their expressions shifted to one of resignation. They turned their gaze to Li Hoyoung and his group, who now encircled them with an unmistakable air of determination. One of the men broke into a casual laugh, acknowledging that the fight was over. With a weary sigh, he remarked that it was time to call it a day. They hoisted their injured companion onto their shoulders. The man joked that their chairman would likely be furious upon seeing their current state, but added that witnessing Korea's future hunters in action made it all worthwhile. His companion, less amused, muttered complaints about how their fallen teammate always acted recklessly, leaving others to deal with the consequences. With a carefree wave and a playful taunt, they called the cadets kiddos and told them to take care before disappearing into the night. The status window flickered to life, announcing their quest's success. The group erupted into cheers, celebrating their victory with shouts of relief and joy. Amid the celebration, Li Hoyoung exhaled deeply, allowing himself a moment of respite. His gaze fell on the status window, noting with satisfaction that only 2 minutes remained on the quest timer. Yunam approached him, a hint of curiosity in his voice, and asked if Hoyoung had anticipated today's events. Hoyoung, deflecting, reminded Yunam that they had just saved him and hinted that gratitude should come first. Flustered, Yunam mumbled a quick thanks, which Hoyoung pretended not to hear, his teasing tone making the moment lighter. Yunam repeated his thanks more earnestly, prompting Hoyoung to silently reflect on how significant this regression must be for him. For Yunam, this was a unique experience, unlike anything he had encountered in his countless cycles. Turning to leave, Hoyoung cautioned Yunam to tread carefully, warning that this regression would prove more challenging than any before. Curiosity flickered in Yunam's eyes as he asked if Hoyoung, too, was a regressor. With a knowing smile, Hoyoung replied that he was something far beyond that. Yunam, intrigued, placed a hand on Hoyoung's shoulder and reminded him that he had yet to explain how to break the curse of regression. The following morning, The classroom buzzed with excitement as the professor prepared to announce the group assignments for the dungeon practical scheduled for the next day. The professor began announcing the names of group leaders, but Lee Hoyoung, lost in thought, barely registered the words. Hoyoung's thoughts lingered on Oh Yoon-nam. His eyes wandered to the status window displaying the armor of Thea, a reward offering a 25% increase in defense. The memory of Yoon-nam admiring the armor and expressing his gratitude the previous night filled Hoyoung with pride. The professor's voice broke through Hoyoung's musings as he announced Group 4's leader, Oh Yoon-nam. Hoyoung's attention sharpened as the professor continued, listing the names of Yoon-nam's group members. To his satisfaction, his name was among them, along with Woo Ji-ho, Shin Sungbyum, and Go Young-woo. Internally, Hoyoung celebrated the strategic success of being placed in this group, knowing it brought him closer to the best possible rewards. Later that afternoon, under the golden sunlight, tension simmered between Oh Yoon-nam and Lee Hoyoung. Yoon-nam, visibly uneasy, confronted Hoyoung about the upcoming dungeon. He expressed his growing concern, knowing that the dungeon was about to enter a berserk state. Though dungeon berserk events were not entirely uncommon, the timing felt suspicious. Yoon-nam confessed that despite experiencing multiple regressions, he had never been able to uncover the cause of these disruptions. Desperation laced his voice as he pleaded with Hoyoung for any insights, suspecting that Hoyoung's role might be more significant than he let on. Hoyoung, reflecting on the plot of the novel he remembered, recalled that 3 groups, including his own, would face the berserk dungeon. Only Group 4, Yoon-nam's group, had survived the disaster. However, the novel never explained why the berserk event occurred, leaving Hoyoung without answers. With a heavy heart, he admitted as much. Frustrated, Yoon-nam grabbed Hoyoung by the collar, his determination flaring despite his helplessness. He insisted that even if the situation seemed inevitable, they had to try to make a difference. Hoyoung, overwhelmed by the pressure, shouted back in frustration, lamenting the lack of clues from the novel's author. The commotion drew the attention of Sun Seoyeon, who peeked around a corner. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight. Hoyoung's shirt was torn, Yoon-nam's tie hung loosely, and the two stood gripping each other's clothing in a tense standoff. Misinterpreting the scene, she froze before mumbling that she must have wandered into the wrong place again and quickly turned away. Both Hoyoung and Yoon-nam scrambled to explain, their protests lost in the awkwardness of the moment. At the dungeon entrance, Group 4 stood in silence as the professor commanded them to enter. As they crossed the threshold, the status window activated, detailing their task to clear the dungeon as part of the practical test. Hoyoung exhaled deeply, his thoughts still clouded by Seoyeon's earlier glare and the unresolved berserk dungeon mystery. Oh Yoon-nam, taking charge, suggested splitting up to cover more ground. He reminded everyone to use their radios in case of trouble. Hoyoung chose a direction and began exploring, his thoughts consumed by the chaos he anticipated. He categorized the groups in his mind. Group 4, his own, Group 9, which included Chai Yiseol and Sun Seoyeon, and Group 12, led by Kim Sayoung. He felt confident about Group 9's survival, given Yiseol's healing skills and Seoyeon's formidable strength. As for Group 12, he could only wish them luck. His focus snapped back to reality as 2 monsters appeared before him. Tightening his grip on his sword, he prepared to engage. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. Turning, he was startled to find Go Young-woo clinging to him, tears glistening in the boy's eyes. Young-woo, the youngest member of the group, looked up at him with a mix of fear and apology. Hoyoung could only stare in silent concern, wondering why Go Young-woo was crying.
To be continued. If you want to watch the next part, then like and subscribe and let me know in the comment of what recap you want to watch next.